All right. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. Welcome to VUX World. Sorry, I was a bit late there. LinkedIn was playing up, and couldn't tell whether we were live or not. But we are live, or live and direct. My name is Ken Sims. I'm your host, as always, and I need to tell you about the Conversational AI and Chatbot Summit that's happening in Edinburgh. VUX World has this track on the 16th of March in Edinburgh covering enterprise automation using conversational AI. It is presented by Core AI. It's part of the broader European Chatbot Summit, and it's going to be absolutely immense. We've got Core AI, we've got Vodafone, we've got Love Holidays, we have Decathlon, we've got Deepgram, we've got Action AI, we've got LNAR, Total Jobs Group. A whole bunch of brands are going to be there sharing with you how to implement conversational AI in the enterprise successfully and how to achieve big goals with conversational AI in 2023. So you can go to theeuropeanchatbot.com. They're going to flash it up right now. And if you use the promo code VUXEU23, you'll save 30% on your tickets. That is theeuropeanchatbot.com, promo code VUXEU23 to save 30%. Hopefully, you will go there, and hopefully, I will see you in Edinburgh. If you can't make it to Edinburgh, there is online tickets available. You can watch the whole thing online if you go to theeuropeanchatbot.com. All right. Now then, without further ado, Sean Moss. Hello, Sean. Thank you for joining us. I'm going to bring on our guest today right now, who is Matt Taylor, the co-founder and head of product at Knowbl. Very exciting company and very timely as well. The stuff that Knowbl is doing, considering the attention and the movement in the kind of large language model space and generative AI space. Matt has got a lot of experience, and Knowbl in particular, making very good use of this technology. So, Matt, welcome to VUX World, my friend. Thanks for joining me.
Yeah, thanks, Kane. Thanks for having me. Excited to get into today's conversation, and yeah, it's just been a crazy time. The ChatGPT really, ignited the start to all this.
It has, doesn't it? It seems to be every podcast that I've done since December or November has been the beginnings of that conversation has been, hasn't ChatGPT just sent this industry absolutely crazy? Everyone seems to be feeling it. It's mad.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because the technology's been there, right? The GPT 3.0, 3.5, if you go back to the BERT models, these large language models have been there, but it's gone viral to the point where I'm answering texts from my brother about that, who's not even in this space at all, asking me, hey, like, is ChatGPT kind of similar to what you guys do? The other day I saw it on the Golf Channel, and it's just like it's really everywhere. So it's hilarious and awesome at the same time to just see everyone in just my life being like aware of what's going on with ChatGPT. And yeah, it's just been a crazy time.
Yeah, it's I got an invite the other day from I'm going to be doing some a little bit of lecturing for one of the unis around here, and they invited me to a discussion that the kind of staff at the uni have organised, and they're trying to invite the students to it, and it is all about kind of the impact of ChatGPT on education. And it's like what's really interesting is how, as you said, these large language models have been around for a long time. Conversational AI has been around for a long time. The concept of AI has been around forever, but it's now getting to the point which is good, which is that lots of people are talking about AI. They're talking about the ethics. They're talking about how to use it responsibly and effectively. They're talking about how it's going to disrupt real kind of like fundamental industries that have existed the same way as they currently are for a long time, like education, you know. Um, and what's interesting though is that people are not talking about AI necessarily, the impact of AI. They're talking about the impact of ChatGPT, the product. So the
Mhm.
product is just it's the product itself that's got the sort of reputation, which opens that conversation in broader circles about AI more generally, which I think is a good thing, you know.
100%. I think bringing attention to, how this AI can be applied to solve so many problems. Obviously we're focused a lot on the enterprise, but there's so many different, applications of of how you can apply this. And when you think about education, I think about like if I had this back in high school, just the ability to be like, hey, can you, type me up a book report on this book, or I used to have to read Spark Notes, and that was how I learned really quickly. But this is like times a million when it comes to being able to do that type of stuff.
If I used to be one of those people, and probably still am to a certain extent, which saves everything until the night before. And it's
Yeah.
like, you know, 11 o'clock the night before, I really should study for this exam. I really need to crack on with this report. I went to college and I did, music technology, and one of the assignments that we had, I always remember, was we had to create a video. We had to find a video, take the audio off it, and then rebuild the audio in that video from scratch. So I found a little cartoon, it's called C Lab. It was like a bit of a kinda like it was an Adult Swim cartoon, like an adult cartoon. It's called C Lab. It was hilarious. And I found one of those cartoon episodes. It was about 15 minutes long, took all the audio off it, and me and my mate were doing this assignment together, and it was, like, literally the day before it was due, and we're like, "What on earth are we gonna do? We've got this blank video, we've got no audio at all, and it's just me and him in my bedroom." So anyway, my dad had been out for a few drinks, and I rang him up and I said, "Where, Dad, what time are you gonna be back?" He said, "I don't know, about 10:30 in the evening at night." It's like about 8 o'clock at night now. And I said, "Right," I said, "Any chance you could bring some of your mates back?" I said, "I've got this assignment I need to do, and it's due tomorrow at college, but I just need some audio. I need some people to record some dialogue." So I heard my dad put his phone by his side and went, "Hey, lads, uh, fancy a few drinks from man after this?" And they were like, "Yeah, yeah, yeah, yeah." He goes, "Our kid needs us to record some stuff for his college work and that." They were like, "You are, you are." Anyway, they came round. There must have been about 5 of them in my bedroom, all smashed, you know what I mean? They've been out drinking all night. And I'm just giving them all a microphone. I'm saying, "Read this line, read this line, read this line." And I cobbled together the dialogue of this for this cartoon based on all of these drunk men. This was at 11 o'clock the night before it was due in. Turned out it was actually really funny and it was actually good, so it worked out all right. But if I had ChatGPT back then, none of it would be as anxiety provoking as it was. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, no doubt. I mean, sounds like it went well though, and
It did,
yeah,
yeah.
that's a great story. I love it.
So tell me about Knowbl then. In fact, tell me about yourself first of all. You've got a lot of experience in this space. You're at Clink prior, Knowbl now. Tell me a little bit about your journey in this sort of conversational AI NLP space.
Yeah, so I mean, how I found my way in this space, was sometimes I always say it's lucky, but also meant to be. So I was a business major and I was working at PwC and doing consulting. And one of the things that they were focusing on is really growing an innovation lab. So I was interested in that, just something a little bit different than the classic consulting projects. And we started working with a lot of these enterprises. It was mainly on the financial services, and we were talking with a lot of these conversational AI providers. So that's actually how I got introduced to Clink. And at the time, there was a couple of my people that I went to college with that were over there. So it's in Ann Arbor. That's where I went to school. So joined Clink and was such a great experience. Spent a little over 3 years there, and really just became so entrenched in the product and really being able to take these experiences that ultimately you're trying to solve problems for. So, one of the customers we had at that time was a U.S. bank, and every single time that they asked us, "Hey, can we build this new intent?" Scoping it out, understanding, all the complexities of a conversation, and really working with the data scientists, the engineers. It was an awesome process, and it was, one of those things where I learned so much, and built a lot of great relationships there. And one of the things, though, over time that we really realized is, and I think COVID highlighted this, and COVID highlighted a lot of things for a lot of people, right? So, it's one of those things that when we were in the space that we were, financial services was obviously hit very hard by COVID. Contact centers volumes were going up crazy, and at that time, I was the director of product, and I was the product owner of our Feeny virtual assistant. That's what we called it. It was our virtual assistant that we really wanted to leverage as far as an out of the box solution that would obviously be customized when we go from bank to bank or credit union. But ultimately, that was the base solution. And everyone was coming to us, "Hey, like we need intents about stimulus checks, we need intents about loan forgiveness," all the things people were calling in about. And started to realize, like, wow, this is not scalable. Like building out these intents aren't scalable. We, at the time, we had intents around ordering checks, deposit checks, and just working with the team and figuring out how much work goes into really going through all that data that's been collected and train the AI, and then having to, manipulate that data, take out some of that. And it really just, it got to the point where adding a new intent was, becoming so much longer than the previous one as far as the cycles that would be taken up with the team. And that's kind of when we realized, hey, there's got to be a better way, and the one of the other co-founders at Knowbl, Parker Hill, he was the chief architect over at Kling, and me and him had built a really great relationship. And he was very connected to the research side, and he was PhD in this, and really understood where there's always a gap as far as what's available in the market and what research is working on. Because at the end of the day, academia doesn't have the problem of, hey, we got to productize this. We can just focus on researching the coolest innovations and really continuing to push the envelope. And that's ultimately what OpenAI is out there doing. And ultimately, what we realized is leveraging these large language models, we could start to solve a lot of these problems that we are running into. And a lot of that is just the management of all the data. So that's, and then we got introduced to Jay Wolcott, our CEO. He had been, he was his company, Digital Roots, which was a social media AI company. They got acquired by Interaction, so another voice AI virtual assistant company. So he was actually dealing with the same stuff over there, and so we kind of all got together and really just figured out, like, hey, like, if we got to do this all over again, what are some of the biggest pain points, and how could we solve those pain points with large language models? And that's really the birth of Knowbl and how it started. And that was in November of 21. So it's been about a year and 4 or 5 months, and it's it's been crazy. It's I laugh because the conversations we had about 8 months ago, whenever, like, we stopped saying transformer models, large language models on calls, because every time we said those words, like, enterprise didn't know, and it almost sounded like gimmicky. They just were like, I don't know what that is. And then the same enterprises later down the line, like, they remember, oh wait, like, and they're like, oh wait, you guys are the ones using transformer models now that, like, ChatGPT's out. So it's just kind of cool to see the evolution, the knowledge transfer that always has to happen from this vendor enterprise relationship, start to evolve over time.
Interesting. That's really good. So you alluded to a big pain point there, which is managing these intents. Kind of as you begin to scale, you get more intents. Some of them become similar. What's the difference between order a new card and freeze my card? There's a lot of similarity in the words that are in those sentences and things like that. You get into disambiguation most of the time rather than actually matching on an intent. And then you add one new intent, and how does that affect the rest of your model? There's a whole bunch of regression testing that needs to be done, and it becomes kind of very convoluted and complicated. So completely concur with that. What are some of the other challenges that, when you kind of said that you all got together, and we'll get on to Knowbl in a minute, but, like, what are some of the other challenges, not necessarily inherent in Clink, but in that kind of way of operating, that you were seeking to try and solve?
Yeah, so I mean, like, when you design a conversation, there's a lot of parts of that, right? So what we've already, you've alluded to, is the intents, right? So an intent, you want to classify the user to go to where ultimately you would want them to go, and you collect those training utterances, training phrases, however you want to, whatever you want to call those. But then there's other parts of these conversations. So say we're talking about, maybe I want to filter out through a search type of, like, if I'm asking about some certain types of products, transactions, there's filters, right? Or if maybe I'm even performing a transaction, I need to find what are called entities or slots. And so when you think about slot or entity extraction, that actually takes even more data than intent classification. So normal, like, standard intent classification, you'd see really around 100 to 300 utterances that we would train the AI on. It really depends on how much you scale the model out. Sometimes when you scale it out, you want to actually reduce the amount of utterances. But the entity extraction, would sometimes take thousands of examples. So you're going through, and you could crowdsource however you want. You still have to curate the data, but you're labeling all these different examples for the AI to recognize patterns of where it should extract these different entities. So that was a huge, huge problem. Then you go on, okay, like when we're creating experience, so we need to create the intents. We need to extract the important pieces of information once they're in that intent. But then we also need to like allow for contextual awareness. So if I'm, the user, and I'm talking about, hey, can you show me all my transactions on restaurants? Okay, like it gives me that. But then I want to be able to say, okay, how about over the last month? Okay, what about those specifically at, McDonald's, or those specifically at, during this period of time? And really what you're doing is creating these contextual flows. And these transitions, they require data too. So like we always use the example of like, when you're in financial services, like you think about, okay, we want to create an experience around opening an account. Maybe it's an IRA. Well, it's not as simple as the user's not just going to always say, hey, I want to open an IRA. Sometimes they come in with like, hey, can you tell me the difference between traditional and Roth IRAs? And what you create is you end up with an experience with about 15 to 20 intents that are all related, but now you need to create all these transitions. And so before you know it, the amount of data you collected to just power that one experience that you ultimately wanted, which is opening an IRA, it just now, took, thousands and thousands of utterances. And now the problem is once you try to scale that, it's difficult, because now you have to go back, and every single time you're adding any type of similar intent, and it doesn't even have to be a similar intent. The way these models are trained, there's biases that you sometimes only the best data scientists could really spot when they're going through. And that's the difference between that generation of models and large language models, is really the previous generation is recognizing patterns. So the analogy I use is, imagine I were to, we were to start a company, we need to hire a customer service rep to answer phone calls. Well, like the previous generation would be like, okay, we're going to hire someone that doesn't understand the language that they need to serve these people in. So we have to actually teach them the language as we're teaching them the domain. That's going to be incredibly difficult. The other way is the large language models is like taking someone who basically has at least, maybe a high school diploma, and they understand the language. Now we need to teach them the domain. So it's very, very limited as far as how much information we need to provide in order to get it to that same, the same competency. And when you think about scaling, then it makes it way easier, because again, when you're looking at the pattern recognition, it can start to identify wrong patterns. And we've seen that so many times. We're working with enterprise, and one of them was telling us, yeah, we have this rewards intent we build, but like every time someone mentioned their spouse, it would go to rewards, and we didn't understand why. And they went and started looking at the data, and it just happened to be that a lot of the data had things like, my wife, my spouse, my husband, and all of a sudden what it did is create this bias towards anytime it sees that, it thinks that is important to that. And that's because it doesn't understand language. It's just recognizing patterns. And that's ultimately where large language models can help a lot, is they actually understand language. We're not training it on all the different nuances of how people speak. We're actually training it on the domain now. And that's how we can get these large language models to do some of the more specific things we need them to do.
That's very good. That is a very good way of analyzing it. What then what does Knowbl do then? Obviously, there's a large language model component. You're setting out to try and solve the problem of all of this kind of the lack of scalability from the intent side of things, the lack of scalability from the entity and slot filling or classification side of things, or extraction rather. You're trying to solve the problem of managing context, which does get very complex. I remember you mentioned Roth IRAs and stuff there. I once worked on something that was doing something very similar, and it was a prototype, so we had no data, and basically had to just build all based on entity extraction and slot and context basically. So we're trying to find a retirement account. It all kind of depends, doesn't it, on how much you earn, how much you can save, all this kind of stuff, depending on whether you want a Roth or traditional or whatever. And the complexity of just understanding where this conversation could go to, it was just unwieldy. Add the data on top of that, and you've got a recipe for disaster, especially if you want to change something, as you said, insert a new thing into that web. and what else do you break when you do that? So what does Knowbl do then? So when you, as you said, you got down back to the drawing board. Let's do this again. If we were going to start with a blank piece of paper, what would we do? What happened then? What did you do?
Yeah, so the first thing we talked about is natural language generation really at a point where enterprises can trust that AI can go out there and throw out a response with really out restricting it, right? Like, if you look at ChatGPT, one of the cool parts about it is it can just generate its own response. But when you think about the enterprise level, they don't have the they don't have the risk tolerance to allow that to happen. They can't afford ChatGPT to say something that could honestly be, very incorrect, but they will also make it sound very factual. Like they're very good at making something that isn't right sound right. And you can't have that in an enterprise. So what we realized is, okay, well, we need to constrain this, right? We need to constrain the generation part to something that they have. And at this point, all the research pointed towards the amount of content that these brands are creating on an annual basis is just increasing at an exponential rate. Like content is being pushed out quicker than ever before. And part of that is because of the content generation, applications like a Jasper, which leverages GPT. But ultimately, what we're seeing is, okay, so we have a ton of this content that's already been approved by the brand. So let's configure this large language model to be able to actually look at this content, ingest it, and then use that to answer the questions that a user may have when they go to that digital property of the brand. So what we built is, the initial layer is this platform that allows the AI to go and ingest content, whether it's a knowledge-based content management system, documents, wherever it is. And a lot of these, large enterprises have it. I mean, their content is everywhere. And so what you want to do is take in all that content and really allow the AI to be able to parse out what is the best answer based on the user's query. And that's leveraging these large language models. And then, that's kind of where all right, well, let's push the envelope a little further. What if we were, how containing or maintaining contextual awareness is very difficult and it's manual. Can we figure out a way to allow the AI to do this from an automated fashion? And so then what we did was we built a layer on top, and this is patented, is the ability to, once the AI ingests that content, what we're doing is we're clustering all these similar topic areas. And once those topic areas are clustered as far as the similarity between them, like semantically, then when a user can go in and ask questions, they can ask those follow-up questions. They can say, hey, tell me what is a traditional IRA? Tell me a little bit about that. Okay, how does that differ from a Roth? Okay, what are the contribution requirements? And being able to go through that conversation while maintaining context of the fact I'm talking about that traditional IRA. And so being able to do that automatically, is a huge step as far as being able to have that conversational experience. So now we've connected to their content. We've now made it very conversational in the fact that I can just continue to ask these questions. And now what we have is a great informational experience. And that informational experience can be applied in a lot of different, business use cases, whether it, if an agent needs to get information while they're on the phone, if the user itself goes to a website, we joke around because one of the first things we started was like, why are websites still the same 25 years later? Like you can actually see websites like over year by year and see like how they've changed. And some of these enterprises, like it looks the same 20 years later. It's like you think about like a digital property should not look the same 20 years later. And all they do is add more tabs and add more links and all these things. And it's very difficult for a user to go in I love to use analogies, so I'll use this one. Like imagine I'm going to, a hardware store and I need help. Most of the time they're going to come up to me and say, hey, how can I help you? They're going to guide me throughout the store. Well, if I come into the website, which now COVID has made it very normal that is your brick and mortar, that's the part where I'm going to become a customer. When I come into Home Depot or Lowe's or any of those websites, you look at those and you're like, oh my God, like where do I go? Like it's too much. Your brain's overstimulated by the amount of things. And you just want to ask like, hey, like I'm like trying to replace my shower door. Like, what do I need for that? And instead of like having to like guess where you have to, click. And so ultimately, what we did is like, okay, let's start with that informational perspective, and we did that. And we got to the point where it's like, okay, like this is great. It's headless. We're able to power a search or chat or anything. And then how do we push this further now? Like we call these transactional experiences, but now if the user is authenticated and we can actually get information in the back end from this brand, what are like, how do we create those experiences? And some of those you can only expedite so much, right? Like you have integrations that you're going to have to build into, and some of the dialogue flow or management of how the conversation goes. But that entity extraction, that's so critical. And so what we did was actually another patent that we have is we built a layer that allows for this few shot learning with entity extraction. So instead of, if I'm building out a funds transfer type of flow, normally I would need, 300 to 500 utterances where I like label, hey, what's the destination account, the source account, the amount that they want to transfer. Now we can literally just give like one little phrase that says, hey, like destination account or source account, or where the money's going to, where the money's coming from. And because the large language models understand language, they understand what to look for now. And so it's very, very easy to create these experiences compared to how it was before. And so that's those are some of and we're continuing to knock down these big problems that we're addressing, like when we had to build these experiences in the market. And so that's why we always say we're like researchers that are practitioners. We look at the research and we're following the latest research, but we want to make sure that we're applying this to the problems that we know enterprises are facing because we live this life.
Yeah, interesting. So there's a whole bunch of stuff to unpack there. Like the first thing which would be interesting is when you say there that you can, and there's a question from Sean, and we'll get to that, Sean, in a minute. Using it to extract entities. So one of the things that large language models are said to be is very good when they work, but then again they might not work because it's generative and it's a little bit unpredictable. So how accurate is an LLM, for example, in the Knowbl platform at entity extraction? Is it
So
100%? Is it 80%?
no,
Like, how accurate is
no,
that?
no. So without any training, and it goes from, I would like say the same for intent classification, entity extraction, to even the automated contextual part. I usually would say it's around, like, out of the box without any type of additional training or fine tuning, you're looking at around a 70%. And like, that's not great, but it's also pretty far from like, just being able to do that right out of the gate. Now, what we allow and what we built for in the platform is knowing, okay, well, 70% might cut it for some businesses that are new to this and they just need something out there. But a lot of the enterprises aren't going to settle for that. They want to get to that 85, 90% accuracy rating. And so how we allow from that, like 70 to 90%, traditionally, that's actually like the hardest once you're getting to that point on these traditional models, because every time you fix something, you're kind of breaking something else. And so what we allow for is, one, we allow the user to input utterances to like basically what would be called few shot learning, to allow it to accompany the content that's there. So that's one way. But another thing that's very important that we implement is what we call our query diagnosis tool. So when a query it goes into the system and say it gives you the wrong piece of content, the wrong answer, what we allow is for you to go in there, see where it went, and then actually match it to where it should have gone. And then what we do is we produce this query diagnosis, which actually will weight every token. So you can think of every word as weighted, and it will show you what words are being taken, like are gravitating it towards where it went, or taking it away from where it went. So ultimately, I'm able to see now, and this is what a data scientist would be doing in their head when they're looking at these and using different tools to figure this out. We're now allowing someone who isn't a data scientist to see, oh wow, like this word is really like troublesome for this specific utterance. let's add a variable utterance to our, our set of data to, ultimately be able to train it that, hey, this word shouldn't trip you up anymore. And we don't have to now, add tons of data. We just added one utterance. And now that will work with that large language model to ultimately be able to kind of fine tune that, if you will, throughout the process. So that's how we allow from that 70 to getting up there towards that upper echelon of accuracy.
That's good. When you're this is again related to Sean's question. I will come to that question in a minute because I think we touched on a little bit of it here actually. But let's take that use case there. A brand, lots of content, knowledge base, website content, loads of different sources. You ingest that. Do you understand that correctly? Do you scan it or do you ingest it?
So we ingest it. So most of the time
Yeah.
what we'll want to do is integrate with that, like wherever their system is that, like, that content is actually the original copy of. And then once we integrate with that, it then allows, so, they can pass back once they want to, increase the amount of content or make changes, and that it then will get to our system. So every time they update it, it ultimately is updated in our platform.
Yeah. And then you're using the LLM to take a query from the customer, figure out where that content sits, and then what do you do then? Do you take the content, synthesize it, and then generate a response? Or do you use the LLM to just find the place in the content and then serve verbatim what is in the knowledge management system or on the web page or whatever?
So we'll leverage LLM to actually find exactly the snippet of content that you would ultimately want to answer a certain question. Now, one of the things that we've seen, because we've tested this early on, of like, okay, well, it obviously is going to work really great for FAQs because those responses are already built to be conversational. But like, what happens when you're doing a blog or an article? And there's different ways that you can format it to where we like allow for a word count to condense the answer, because sometimes if you're a user and you have a question, you don't want a full paragraph, you just want a little blurb. And we've also allowed for when you're connecting to these systems that you can actually change the content within our platform as well if you wanted to make it more conversational. But that there's also then different display formats. Search is a great way to display different blogs, because then you can link them to that blog if they want to read more. So we only take maybe the first intro snippet, give them a little taste, and then say, hey, here, link out, and if you want to read more about that. But there's definitely always going to be this content improvement process once we ingest it. Like, again, if they have tons of FAQs, that's always great, because again, FAQs were built to be conversational. So say we upload 1,000 FAQs across all their different, different areas, we load that in there, and then they can have a contextual conversation, works really well. Once we start ingesting some of that unstructured content, there is a process where we have to go and we have to figure out, okay, how would we best format this to answer a question? Because like some of that content, if I'm a user and I'm in a chat, chat window, and they give me this long paragraph and it answers my question, but it's in the middle, that'd be very weird. On Google, like if we show it in a search format, that's kind of normal. Like when I Google something, they give me an answer widget, and sometimes like some of it's not relevant, then they bold what's relevant. That's okay. Like that's what I'm expecting as a user. When I'm chatting, on a chat interface, I'm not expecting that type of experience. So it's all just making sure that you stay true to the experience that you're ultimately trying to build. But again, ultimately, this is supposed to be headless, so you can really allow it to scale across those different properties.
Schoolboy error. I was on mute. So is it fair to say then that you regurgitate content sometimes in the case of an FAQ, but generate content other times if, for example, there's bits of information in lots of different places and a query requires some assembly of content from different data sources? Is that kind of what I'm hearing, or have I misunderstood?
So no, we'll still pick the actual content as it is, because so when it comes to assembling different content, like that's where we're using that's NLG at the same point. If you're still bringing content together and then you're formulating a sentence, sometimes there's still some you're basically like going against the idea that, hey, this has been compliance approved. This content is our, we
Right.
don't have to go through that process of making sure every answer the AI says is, truthful, logical, all those things. So we're staying compliant by really just allowing only the content that they have. We do take word for word. What we take is the best content available for that, specific question. And I think the great part, that's kind of two pronged when we think about the value of Knowbl. Like, there's obviously all the application you get of like being able to conversationalize their content, but also the voice of the customer. Now you can start to see where you have gaps in that content, right? So like if I'm a brand and I'm, and I'm developing content, I'm the head of content strategy, and I see in the system tons of people asking about, this new, especially with the way our world is working, everything, every day there's something new people are asking about. We would want to have new content developed, and this will guide us into, hey, everyone's asking about this. Let's kind of point our content strategy towards that. And as we develop new content, now it's actually powering that AI as well. So it's kind of, it's working in unison.
That makes sense. That makes sense. And that then answers Sean's question, which is how do you trust the AI output? And the answer to that then is that you don't have it generate, you use compliance approved content and you only serve what's already been approved.
Yeah, yeah, and again, as the research continues in the NLG space, I think what we're already seeing is enterprises starting to get a little bit more comfortable with the idea of the AI producing its own language, or producing its own response. But at this point in time, at least from the conversations I'm having with a lot of these enterprises, it's just not, they're not comfortable yet, they're just not willing to take that risk, and so that's why they're really comfortable with our solution in that, like, we are only giving them what you guys have already written. If you guys haven't written something about it, we can't give them information about that.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it's different, isn't it, from an enterprise point of view? Like their risks are obviously a lot higher than, for example, Microsoft and Bing GPT. There's a risk there. You get information wrong, but ultimately, it's like not your responsibility. It's from the web. We just give you what's there. But Micah Hronevicker did a really interesting video yesterday where she kind of filmed her first. She got access to the Bing GPT and filmed her first interaction with it, and she was asking questions about mechanical keyboards and the size of certain mechanical keyboards. And so what she did is she asked a question to Bing GPT, which was, "Can you give me the size measurements for the X, Y, and Z mechanical keyboards, three mechanical keyboards?" And asked that question to Bing GPT. It come back with an answer. Said yes, the measurement for this one is that, the measurement for that one is this, and the measurement for this one is that. And it linked to the source, right? So you can go to the website and see. But what it had done is it wasn't just regurgitating what was on the source page, it was generating content based off of the source page. And what that meant was the three answers were completely incorrect and not actually a reflection of what was on the source material. So it's like generation sounds fantastic, but actually, for a lot of these cases, it's not needed at all.
And the scariest part about it is that it's so good at being able to present it in the format of which it looks like it's right. And that's where it gets really, really scary for the enterprises. We've been talking about this as far as like the generation part. But like what it'll do is if, say for example, I'm a bank and have a lot of different accounts. If I say, hey, what's your rate for this account? If it doesn't, if it doesn't actually like have the rate for that checking account or whatever account I'm talking about, it will grab another rate and use that in place. And now you're giving a user completely incorrect information that is influencing their purchasing decision with you. And like that's where it's like, no, like there's no way they're gonna allow that. So, we put these guardrails on there. And I don't know if the enterprises will ever be completely fine with the guardrails coming off. I I don't know how that looks, but at the same time, with this evolution of technology, there's always pushing the envelope with research. So I definitely could see it in the future, but yeah, at this point, there's just too much risk.
Definitely, definitely. You were talking earlier about context management and stuff like that. Um, I had a conversation with someone the other day about knowledge graphs and the role of knowledge graphs in AI systems and stuff like that. And the debate was when is the right time to use a knowledge graph? And it kind of got me thinking a little bit as you were explaining there, the way that you kind of manage context being kind of, you'd ask a question about this, and then behind the scenes, that this is related to that, and therefore you can kind of hop and skip and stuff like that. Is it kind of a knowledge graph premise or structure that you're basing this on, or is there another way of managing context in the way that you described?
Well, how these large language models are actually working once we, take all the content in there is what it's actually doing is it's giving these vector representations. And these vector representations are actual numbers that then are attributed based on the semantic similarity between them. And so what that ultimately allows is when I, as the user, come in and ask a question, it's going to take the semantic similarity of my question, look at all the different embeddings, to then say, okay, well, what is the closest vector representation based off that? And then that's how it's going to match it. And then the layers that we've built on top. So in a way, it's already doing that knowledge graph, but now you think about adding the contextual layer. So now we're not just taking the semantic, meaning of what my first query is, but maybe the next query is, but the query before that and the one before that. So now it's compounding on that to really allow for the AI to go and be a little bit more, like choose the right piece of content based on that contextual flow instead of just being that one shot, like, hey, we're just taking this question and just, answering, that from the content. We're actually looking at the conversation now. And that's how that contextual management is automated. So in a way, it is doing that knowledge graph type of work, but it's doing it in an automated fashion. That's ultimately why large language models are so useful for a lot of reasons, but, ultimately, in the way we're using it.
Nice. There's a question from Nan Bress here, which I will get to in a minute, Nan. But I'm curious about kind of this context management thing because we had Nick Frost, the CTO of Cohere, on the podcast a couple of weeks back, and I said to him, what would be the one thing that you wished LLMs could do? And his response was he wishes that they didn't have a character limit in terms of the prompt that you can give them, and also a character limit in terms of what they can respond with. Like you can't ask an LLM today to write you a 10,000 page novel. There's just not enough kind of bandwidth on the response kind of thing. So when it comes to managing context, would it be fair to say or not, if there's another way of doing it, that the context could only be maintained for a certain length of time based on the limits of inputs and outputs from an LLM? Or is the context managed elsewhere so that you only give the LLM specific and more concise instructions at every turn?
So unless the way our contextual management works is you can think of these, like, I almost think of these different clusters as kind of these bubbles, right? And so if I enter in a bubble and I start asking questions about this topic area, it is going to look for, like, my next question. It's going to first look in that bubble. Then if it doesn't find information within that bubble, now it goes to the general, like, sense of, like, okay, well, let's now look for the best answer. So in a way, if I stay within that bubble, I can stay in there as long as I want if there's enough content. But, like, as far as that bubble being all the semantic similar, topics or, content. But then once I expand out, then yeah, I would leave the contextual part of that because the AI was unable to find anything contextually aware based on what I was asking. So it's kind of putting these soft guardrails over the actual semantic similar content. But so I can, as a user, I can still go from topic to topic. But, if I want to stay within a topic, I don't have to continue to, like, let the AI know that. I could just stay within that realm. So does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I suppose that I mean that definitely makes sense in terms of how you're managing context. Maybe as another way of phrasing the question would be: do you find that there is any constraints then, perhaps, when using large language models regarding the length of how many characters you can give it and how many characters it can respond with. Maybe in your case, in terms of the response, might not be as relevant because you mentioned you're
Yeah.
using content from elsewhere. So maybe in terms of what you feed the large language model, is there any
Yes.
limitations or constraints?
Yeah, I mean, for a lot of the use cases that we're, working with, we haven't had a problem with, hey, it's too much text to where like it's, overpowering the system. The system is taking too long, like latency and all that. I will say that, the more information that it receives, it is a little bit more of a guessing game on which part it will then ultimately look at and parse out, similar to if I like talk to a human. Like if I give you a loaded question with a ton of different like parts of it, it's going to be hard for you to respond without like saying, well, all right, like, like a human's going to be, oh, well, first off, let's like start with like this one, then this, and like, let's unpack that. The AI, there's parts that you can then manipulate by adding a little disambiguation or potentially even some business logic to break down those, what we would call multi-intents. But at the same time, those are going to be always difficult, just because, again, related to how a human works. If I give you a ton of content or a ton in a question, then like that is going to be very difficult to manage. But as far as the constraints, I can't answer that as far as if we haven't fed it, like as far as the input from the user being like a full page asking a ton of different questions, like, so I don't know if that would put constraint. I would imagine it would to an extent, but yeah, I mean, most of the use cases we're working with are going to be, the longest thing we'll see is maybe 2 paragraphs, if that.
Yeah, that makes sense. We've got a question here from Nan Bress, and we'll get to this question, which is, you mentioned earlier that, being part research and part implementation, is there room for qualitative research, like ethnographers who do deep dives with small sample of respondents who are interested in entering the field, or is all of the research quantitative? Um, so a lot of the research that you're talking about in terms of the development of AI, that's where things like transformers came from in the first place, was people doing research in how to better classify and understand language and stuff like that. Is there space, do you think, for more kind of qualitative research in this field? And from a practitioner point, someone trying to get into this space, is there room there, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely, when I think about the research space, it's always trying to push the envelope. That's what OpenAI is. I'm going to build the best. They're going to build the best AI model. So obviously, a lot of that research is quantitative. But when you think about being a practitioner, a lot of this is then filling in that gap of like, okay, what can the technology do? What do we want to solve? And there's definitely going to be qualitative research that needs to be done there from user studies. And at the end of the day, like, we need to figure out a lot of times, how are users going to respond to what we're creating? And you have to be able to find that research in order to guide the user. And we still see it in today's, chatbots or today's virtual assistants. Sometimes people still want to click a button. There are times where it's like, oh no, it's easier to click a button than going in and being more conversational. So there's always going to be, I think, design and especially research around the user design is always going to be such a focal point. And I mean, that's really the UX of it. Like, I mean, VUX, like you guys, like that's all it is like really focusing on the UX of voice and how you can really understand what, ultimately what the user wants. Cause that, if the user doesn't want to engage with the tool now becomes way less useful than, we wanted it to be.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just going to put a link on here, Nan, in the chat there, which is essentially the conversation I had with Micah Coppins yesterday from Open Dialogue was basically all about this. And the conversation that I titled, Have We Forgotten Some of the Basics? Which is that take any project, whether it's UX design, whether it's service design, what's the first thing that you do? You try and understand the business context, you try and understand the user context. That user context understanding can come in a lot of different ways. You could do some kind of like quantitative analysis and look at analytics and analyze transcripts and do topic modeling and all that kind of stuff. Or you can actually do some interviews. You can speak to some customers. You can figure out what they actually think and feel and the situation that they're in. You can do user journey maps and all that kind of stuff. So that conversation yesterday was a real deep dive in user research methodologies and techniques for conversational AI. So, Nan, if you're interested, I've just put the link there in the chat. But it's definitely something that maybe not. I haven't identified a lot of research necessarily being done as in a similar sense, in a way that some of the kind of like quantitative research is aiming at trying to further the application of the technology, make LLMs more accurate or more controllable, make natural language understanding more accurate, better at understanding intent and stuff like that. Maybe there's space for research around qualitative research around people's thoughts and feelings and behavior towards AI. As we start to, the start of the conversation, we spoke about how universities are on top of it now. People in marketing are on top of it, HR are on top of it, everyone's now on top of it. So it's a good time to be thinking about the ethical implications of it, the security requirements of it, the behavioral components and stuff like that. So I think there's definitely space for all types of research, but very early days. It's only just got to kind of like a place where people's parents know about it, so it's still early days.
Yeah, no doubt. It's crazy how viral it's gone. It's yeah, like we said in the beginning of the session, it's gotten to a point where you can't really turn away from it. Everywhere I look, like it's not just LinkedIn, it's Facebook. Everyone like is talking about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Shout out to Jim Rowe. Hey y'all. Hello, Jim. Shout out to Nick Orlando and Barry Stature. Thank you for tuning in. Matthew Miller. I'll ask you the same question as I asked Nick Frost, which is, you've got a lot of experience with LLMs. The whole Knowbl platform is utilizing them pretty effectively by the sounds of things. What do you wish they could do that they can't do today?
I think it goes back to, one of the reasons that we did that query diagnosis tool. And I think there's a lot of ways we can continue to build on that is the explainability of what the AI is doing. When you think about LLMs in general, and like especially the GPT, it's really a black box. You don't necessarily know why it's choosing the answer it is, whether that's generating the response or potentially, like the way we're using it, where it goes and picks content. I think, when we put the guardrails on, it allows for a little bit easier way to start to peel back the layer and find that explainability. But yeah, I think that's going to just, with anything, it's one of the tricky parts of, improving these models, especially as we start to, see them prevalent around everywhere, is how we're going to explain what's going on so that we can actually improve the model, right? And so that's probably the biggest weakness, if you want to call it that. But yeah, that's where I would want to see some improvements.
And what would that give you? Jim's asking, by knowing why it's choosing a certain answer could presumably help you develop better prompts. Is that part of the reason for wanting this kind of explainability angle? Is there anything else that you would get from having a bit more visibility into how it's all working?
Well, yeah, I mean, one, if you think about it, like from how ChatGPT is doing, it would definitely allow you to develop prompts in a lot better structure, because you would understand exactly how the AI would respond to certain ones. Then I think, again, from our perspective, when you go into, if you have more of that explainability, I really, really think that it's going to allow for way quicker improvements to the model, so that, when you see, hey, why is it grabbing this content? Again, we have the query diagnosis tool that allows you to see certain words and why it's weighted towards other, but maybe going a step further and like understanding, okay, if this word's weighted towards that, is there anything in the underlying model that is, it may have been bias trained on? Because at the end of the day, these large language models were trained on, millions, sometimes billions of parameters of data. So you don't know if there's any bias that was learned. And that's kind of where it gets a little tricky. And that's why the generation is always going to be extremely, terrifying for an enterprise. And I go back to like putting those guardrails on there. I think you're on mute.
It's another schoolboy error. I should know about this by now. I'm only putting myself on mute because my father-in-law is outside stripping the wallpaper, and so it's quite noisy. So shout out to Nick from Core AI. this question hasn't been asked yet, but I think we've covered some of it. But it'd be worth maybe trying to encapsulate the specifics. Um, how is Knowbl's approach with LLMs similar or different compared to other players in the space? So, for example, Nick works at Core AI. We had Raj and Prasanna on last week or the week before discussing how LLMs are a kind of key feature to the Core AI platform and how it's being used for different use cases. Cognigy kind of released a few things over the last few weeks. Raza have been sort of doing the same. Nice CX1 has announced something. Everyone seems to be kind of announcing integrations with LLMs, and I think that the trick is to how they are implemented and to be able to utilize them effectively, basically, rather than just having them. And Core AI is doing some really interesting stuff in that regard, to be fair. But in terms of like, if you compare Knowbl to another type of platform that's perhaps built on a traditional NLU system, what would kind of in a nutshell be the difference between Knowbl and other kind of players in the space?
Yeah, that's a great question. I actually watched the podcast you had with Core AI with Raj and their CTO, was it?
Yeah,
But
Prasanna, yeah, CTO, yeah.
yeah, and really interested in what they're doing. And so it's funny, when first ChatGPT came out, I saw some of the vendors come in really quickly and we're like, oh my God, this is going to be amazing. We're going to use it to generate utterances to train our model. And I was like, well, that seems a little backwards. Like, you're going to generate utterances from a newer model to then use to train a previous model. That's like, like if I were like back in the 1800s and I was like, I came up with an engine that's going to, power the first automobile, but instead I was like, all right, we're going to use it to pull the horse. Like that's not the best application of that. So, as I've started to see, some of the vendors are getting much more, some of the vendors are definitely more on point with, I think, the way they want to do it. From Core AI, I really like the fact that they have this, multi NLU approach where you do have the zero shot mixed with the few shot, and then also their, the NLU that they've created from, before. I would say where we differentiate from, a lot of these brands that are using LLMs is, one, we've really looked at all the problems that you see when you're creating a conversational experience. So I've already touched on it, but the contextual management is a huge piece, and we've automated that process. Entity extraction, such a critical piece. We've also found a way to do few shot learning with that. And, we're going to continue to build our patent portfolio to really see how can we use LLM to really fix, some of the problems that are traditionally here from, really like our experience in the market. And like one of the things we're working on right now is when you think about analytics, especially with how our platform works, where, if there's gaps in content, we actually want to be able to cluster all these utterances that are coming in that aren't answered, and be able to actually allow the user to see, hey, you need to create content for these topics, and here are the different questions that people are asking. So now, now we're making it so much easier to then kind of go on that feedback loop of like, hey, we're seeing what customers are asking. We've actually already clustered to similar topics to the point where we're telling you, hey, you need content for this, and here are the top questions that you should think about answering when you're developing that content. So we just want to continue to use LLMs as in an approach to where we are simplifying the build for the enterprise. And kind of going to your question of how we differentiate from, the traditional NLU provider. I mean, at this point, speed, ease, and scalability is something that those providers, are just not going to be able to say with, truthfully, because of how long it does take. And, live that life. It's too long to get a model with 50 intents. Sometimes it would take a year and a half, and then try to get that 50 to 100 intents. That's it's not going to happen. And at least not without the accuracy diminishing quite significantly to the point where now you're going back. And that's what we've actually seen a lot of these enterprises doing, is they're condensing their model. As they grew their model, the accuracy got so bad, so they had to condense it. And so I think when you jump from the NLU, the traditional NLU providers, to the ones leveraging LLMs, you're going to see a massive increase in just the like speed to market, the ease and agility. And then I think what we're doing differently from, any of the brands or providers with LLMs and it is a competitive space, so everyone's going to be trying to, find ways to catch up, but is ultimately looking at the conversation and what is needed to create the best experience and continuing to leverage large language models to facilitate those. So I just want to continue to kind of push the envelope, and we're always going to be focused on innovation. That is at the core of what we believe as a company, and it's moving so quickly that there's never you can, if you stay 1 year with the same stack, you're going to be old tech soon.
Absolutely. There's a lot of comments going on here. We are going to have to wrap up in a minute. I do have something else at the top of the hour, but Raj Tumaluri, shout out to Raj from OpenStream. Comment is that there is no inherent explainability in LLMs as there is no reasoning capability. That's fair enough. The question I asked, that I did ask Matt, was, what do you wish they did? And so reasoning was part of that. It was a bit hypothetical. Richard Wozeka, shout out to Richard. Not knowing what the LLM is doing and why is sort of like the Heisenberg uncertainty principle for generative AI. Very true, very true. We have, I don't think we're going to get that. There's two questions here. Maybe if we can do some quick fire answers, we can get to some of these questions. So let's try and just do some quick fires just to wrap up these two. We'll start with this one first. Have you heard of, or what is your opinion about the RRG, role and reference grammar, which has a different approach from the regular NLU and LLM? Have you heard of RRG? That's new for me. I've never heard of that.
Yeah, I haven't. I'm definitely gonna research it afterwards. Whenever I can learn something new in this space, always going to. So yeah, I can't give my opinion on it, but definitely going to start reading about it.
Nice one, Christian. You should join me on the VUX World podcast, and you can explain what that is and how it works. Barney, shout out to Barney Stature. Verification, truth/facts, so it doesn't turn into a tool for reinforcing bias and propaganda is obviously important. Not to get too political, but is there a comparison on some level to news media and the potential for Fox GPT and MSNBC GPT? Thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, when you think about the amount of times that these models are going to be created, and like the way now that you can train it on specific domain data to ultimately enhance what it's knowledgeable about, I'm sure you could eventually see that the different news medias are going to ultimately position, I don't know if they're going to build their own model. I doubt that, but very much they could leverage a model to kind of, go out there and basically put out their beliefs. I don't know if that's going to be the best application necessarily. I think misinformation is already something that GPT is struggling with. So it's the validity of what it's going to be giving you. I don't know.
Same here. Yeah, it's a good question. That it's interesting. I saw that BuzzFeed stock went up because it was announcing that it will be using ChatGPT or similar technologies to generate content, and it was like, I thought that's kind of already what it did. I don't think anyone's even going to notice a difference. Like, why has the stock gone up? No, no one's going to notice a blind bit of difference. It could be hallucinating in every single article, and no one will notice a difference from BuzzFeed.
Yeah,
but yeah. Anyway, go on.
No, I was just gonna say, it's funny how sometimes the market reacts to that, because like anyone that's like in the industry, when you see the market reacting, they always react so dramatically to some of these newer implementation. I mean, Google, when they was it like a couple weeks ago, when they did their presentation, their stock dropped like 8%. It was like, oh my god, that's
I know.
It's still Google.
It was crazy. Yeah, the Forbes published something that I shared on LinkedIn, which was that Google stock dropped by like 100 billion because on Bard's, the slide that showed Bard's response to the James Webb Telescope question, it actually got a fact wrong. It got some information incorrect, and the Forbes article was saying that the stock has dropped because of that. And obviously, there's far more going on because that coincides in that week with Microsoft announcing Bing GPT, which is obviously going to be the bigger driver. All of a sudden, Microsoft looks like it's going to take over search. Google stock plummets. Just so happens that there was a fact that was wrong in in the presentation, but it was a good spin. That got quite a good debate going on there. But anyway, Matt, this has been absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much for joining me. For those of you tuning in, do check out Knowbl.com. And for those listening in on the podcast, it is KNOWBL.com. All the links to all that will be in the show notes. So go there, check it out. It does sound genuinely innovative and fantastic. If you're not signed up to the European Chatbot Summit, go to theeuropeanchatbot.com. Promo code VUXEU23 will save you 30% on your tickets on March the 16th in Edinburgh. VUX World is going to be there live, running a whole track of content where we're going to have content from Vodafone, Total Jobs Group, Love Holidays, LNER, Decathlon, a whole bunch of epic companies doing some really, really good stuff with conversational AI. So hope to see you there. Matt, this has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for joining me, mate. It's been wicked.
Yeah, thanks, Kane, for having me on. Always a pleasure, and looking forward to getting some Knowbl swag over there for you.
Definitely. Likewise, there will be some VUX merch on its way to you as well. Definitely. Thank you all for tuning in, and I'll see you on the next one. Thanks.